Welcome to Women We Should Know with international speaker, mindset reset mentor, author, and your host, Leslie Michaels. With audacious honesty and candor, the Women We Should Know podcast presents the wisdom and life-empowering insights of women who are the embodiments of innovation and social evolution. Please join Leslie as she shares potent conversations that will inspire your personal and professional evolutions. Welcome to Women We Should Know.
Welcome back to Women We Should Know, the podcast where we consistently bring you the voices, the intense wisdom, the illuminating audacity of women who are out in the world, challenging the status quo, shattering limiting paradigms, refusing to color inside the lines, not getting in boxes that were created by someone else. And the most beautiful thing about every one of these women who I have the privilege to have a conversation with, the conversation that I share with you, is that every single one of them, as they carve a new path, they leave the light on so that we can see a new way, so that we can see a different door or window. And it is always my joy to be able to bring these conversations to you. Today, I have the incredible honor of bringing to you Dr. Terrlyn Curry. She is the creator of what she calls pastology, the cutting edge field that focuses on the synergy between pastoring and psychology. She holds a BS from Howard University and a PhD from Hofstra University, a Master's of Divinity from Yale University. And she calls herself a pastologist, a licensed psychologist and ordained minister, and is a transformational leader, a coach, a speaker, an author, a retreat leader. The Reverend Dr. Terrlyn has a unique approach to healing, transformation, and manifestation. She places the emphasis on the journey toward sacred intelligence. Now, we're going to speak about that term here in a bit. Places focus on the ability to tap into one's internal source in order to move toward intelligent choices. Those choices that are intended to honor the sacred and help the individual manifest their greatness while simultaneously embracing the humanity of all those around them. Oh my goodness, can we use big doses of that right now? Reverend Dr. Terrlyn works with highly influential and committed leaders who need spiritual life or career coaching as they transform the world, the entire world, by creating a legacy of service, of prosperity, and of greatness. She also provides coaching support for leaders to help them understand how their sphere of influence can help to change the status quo. Oh, there we go, status quo busting, and to dismantle structures that have intentionally and unintentionally, those are the more dangerous ones, and unintentionally created racial disparities. Her coaching provides an opportunity for leaders to create the right context for conversations on race and leadership development with their employees, and discover how racism and unconscious bias influence their hiring practices, affect their clients, and have a direct impact on the company's financial goals. And to understand how racism impacts employees, their work performance, and their feelings of safety in the work environment. She has a long history of working with institutions, organizations, and communities to bridge the racial divide and to promote racial equity. And she is also the host. Now, check this out. You're going to want to visit this. The host of Dismantle Racism with the Reverend Dr. Terrlyn Curry, which airs on Talk Radio, New York City. And now here's another one you're going to want to check out. She is the author of Dismantling Racism, Healing Separation from the Inside Out, and Sacred Intelligence, the essence of sacred, selfish, and shared relationships. And last but not least, she is the pastor of Martin Luther King Jr. Community Presbyterian Church in Springfield, Massachusetts. I am truly honored and delighted to share this conversation with you as our listeners. And Dr. Terrlyn, thank you so much
I am
for
so
coming to our
excited.
podcast.
I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you.
And may I share something with you? Because when you were reading my bio, two things stood out for me that I think are really relevant for the topic of this show. And one is, I am the youngest of 10 children.
Ooh.
And today is actually my mother's birthday. My mother is in another life now, but it's her earthly birthday. And when you were talking about, audaciousness and shining the light, I thought about my mother and father raising 10 kids. Now, I am from the deep South, Mississippi. And I know today we're going to be talking about racism in general. But just thinking about the audaciousness that my parents had with raising us to believe that we could do whatever we put our minds to. So everything I am is because of my mother and my father. And I'm thinking about them today as we're having this interview, and maybe we'll get a little bit more into that. But I was raised 45 minutes outside of where Dr. King was assassinated. I was raised in the hometown of where Ida B. Wells, who was a journalist who wrote about lynching, was raised, but didn't learn about her in high school or elementary school when I got to college. And I was raised 15 minutes from where James Meredith integrated the University of Mississippi. So all of that comes into this conversation. And the final thing I want to say, especially for your listeners, because maybe they've had this at some point in their lives. There was a time where I didn't want people to read my bio. Like I would be out at a church event or some other event, and they would read this long bio. And I'm thinking, I don't need you to read all of that. Just let me get up and do what I'm going to do my presentation, blah, blah, blah. Because something about it felt, is it being boastful? But I'll tell you what my father said in his wisdom one day. I was at my uncle's funeral, and my sister just called me by my name to say, we'll have her to come up and give some words. She didn't say doctor. She didn't say any of that, which I was fine with. My little home church, I'm fine. Sure. My uncle's funeral, I'm fine. And my father said these words. He said, she should have called you doctor. And I said, no, I don't care about anything like that. He said, not for you, but for the people in the audience who would look at you and say, if she can do it, I can too. And so I want to say that to your listeners today, whatever it is that they dream and that they can conceive, if I can do it, if you can do it, they can do it. And all they have to do is let their light shine. That's it.
Well, that just took my breath away. And as my listeners could attest, I'm rarely without words, but thank you so much. Really, really beautiful and potent reminder for all of us. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
And you are full of potency and vibrancy in the way that you commit to your work and to your path on this planet. I know you speak of your topic of relating to a woman's journey from self-expression to self-empowerment with great insight. How would you synthesize that journey into one statement?
The one statement. I sit on the shoulders of the people who came before me, who fought for me to be where I am. And I owe them my life, my work. So I do it because I am carrying their legacy and I'm leaving a legacy for my children. So that might be a run-on sentence, but hopefully it's a sentence.
Don't worry about it. Anyone who's been listening here is used to run-on sentences. I am the queen. Oh, that's I believe that's true of so many of us in terms of being lifted onto the shoulders of mighty men and women. And thank you for the reminder that there is a honoring there. What inspired you as you were? I mean, there are so many things that could have been your impetus, where you were raised, your parents, your father's wisdom. What was that defining moment for you that inspired you to do the work of social justice and racial equity?
So I grew up in a predominantly African-American community, though we went to school. I integrated schools, and so we had people who we were involved with who were white people. So our relationship down south, if you've ever lived down south, you know, we were very hospitable to one another, but we knew we couldn't go to one another's house for dinner or any of that. And what I realized when I left this close-knit community that we were in and really left the South where everybody, white and Black, knew one another and moved to another area, I could see the disparities very clearly, even more so than I had seen down South. And there was something in me that was ignited, I think, to say, when I get my PhD, I'm going to work with the underserved population. And I did, because what I also realized is that I had a sense of really profound community and people who were lifting me up in a lot of ways that people don't have. So I had a commitment then to work with underserved populations. Fast forward, I did some work in the school system, the adjudicated system, the psychiatric hospitals. And then God has a sense of humor, called me to divinity school. And I thought, okay, I'm done. And in between time, I had done trainings on, you know, having courageous conversations about race. So I was in there. But I thought, okay, God has called me to ministry. So that's going to shift a little bit. And it did shift
Mm-hmm.
as I started focusing on wounds of religion,
Mm-hmm.
but I was still always committed to doing social justice work. It was just sort of over here. But the main thing was I was going to work on these wounds of religion. Well, when George Floyd died or was murdered,
Yes.
I responded to that in very different ways than I had before. I had spoken out about other things. I had done trainings with communities because we had a lot of Black and brown men who were being killed, and women actually. But when George Floyd was murdered, I had white colleagues who were saying to me, Terrlyn, help. I need to know how to have the conversation. I need to know what to do. I trust you, you're a friend, blah, blah. And I was in the middle of writing a book on something else. And because I had been doing this work really for about 20 years, I just returned to it. So I know it's a long way of answering your question, but the thing that drives me now is what happened in 2020. Because what I saw as well is that people were really engaged, and now it's dropped off. And I can no longer allow the work that I do to say it's going to drop off. I have to be a resounding, voice. And I think what God has done for me and what the sacred has done for me is to say, no, this is the banner that you must carry. So it's really from early on, and it's just been a consistent, trajectory to saying this is your calling at this moment in time.
Yes, that was a pivotal moment in what will become ultimately our nation's biography later on down the road. And we're yet to see where that will lead us. And I'm thrilled to know you, having come into this again with new pieces, with the religious piece. I want to talk more about racism, but I just want to touch on one thing you said and one word you said, because I was so pleased when I started hearing this word become the norm, underserved, instead of minority, which is a falsehood, instead of disenfranchised, which is a weak word for what it was. I really appreciate use of what feels like a more correct term, simply underserved.
Yes. And that's why, and that comes from my years of doing this work, because our language does change over time. As Maya Angelou say, you know better, you do better, right? And I so appreciate you, even with the word minority, because I don't use that anymore either. It has a whole, if you think about psychologically what that does, if you say, oh, I'm a minority, or even I'm in the majority, or I'm dominant, right? You think about the psychology of that. So yeah.
So thank you. And just calling that out for my listeners to pay attention to. Dismantling racism. Oh my goodness. It seems impossible. It seems like an unachievable goal, while it absolutely has to be pursued. How do you address people who feel completely overwhelmed and don't know what to do, don't even know what to start, where to start?
I have to first acknowledge that even as a person who does this work, and as a woman of color who does this work, it is overwhelming. Sometimes I just want to say, why do I have to be the one to do this?
Right.
But I want to just say that it's a moral issue, and we must start somewhere. Now, I haven't thought about this in quite a while, but for some reason on your show, it just came up for me. I know that it's fearful to start speaking out about this stuff. I know that business-wise, we don't want to say anything. And truth be told, that's why a lot of people will decide I'm not going to post anything. I think when George Floyd happened, that gave people permission. But I just remembered when I started focusing on the wounds of religion and really just pastoring, and I also was the pastor of a predominantly white church. There were lots of Black and brown men being killed. And I never posted on Facebook. I never said anything, publicly, because my Facebook page was where I did business. And I knew as a person of color, if I started saying that, what are the colleagues going to say? So it was a subtle thing. And I thought, that's not my focus. Keep your head down. You're doing your work over here in your community, blah, blah, blah. And then my girlfriend said these words to me. You are a leader. You are a pastor, and you must say something. And from that point on, I wrote a letter to my congregation about what was happening. I then posted it on Facebook, and then people started calling me from different communities saying, can you come and have a conversation? So even though I was still focused in my business on the other thing, I was still doing the work of dismantling racism. And so I would say to the audience 2 things: move out of your fear and don't worry about this as a business decision. It's a moral decision. And just do your part, because every little bit counts. So am I the end all be all of dismantling racism? No, I am not, but what I do matters. And I know that they may not write a book, they may not have a show, but if you start speaking out in your community, look at how you can change things. There's also an intersectionality of race in everything. So people can't just say, oh, well, I'm working on gun control, or I'm working on medical issues, or ageism, or LGBTQIA. Look for the intersectionality. So that's what I would say to people. And use your voice. Let it be heard.
And if I'm maybe so audacious as to add something to what you said, but I'm white is not an excuse.
It is not.
And I know you all have heard me say that before. You'll hear me say it again. But I'm white is not an excuse. It's actually a choice between being active or silently complicit.
Right. And I want to tell you something. One of the things is when I work with people in my classes and they talk about being so afraid, and because they don't want to make a mistake. Do you think I don't make mistakes? I make mistakes all the time. But the only way we learn is to just be courageous enough to step out there and make the mistake. And as you said to me before the show, to have this unquenchable curiosity, because I want to tell you something. Many of the white people that I've worked with are afraid that they're going to be called a racist, to be quite honest. And that's why people don't want to do this work. But I want you to know that as people of color, we may be thinking it anyway, whether you do anything or not. We specifically, if you don't do anything, might think it. So you can't control what other people think. I had a guest on my show a few weeks back, and she's in a town where a man was murdered by a white man. And she talked about how the white people didn't show up the next day at the vigil, and how hurtful that was to the Black community, that the white people didn't show up. And there were white people who responded and by saying, I just didn't know if I would be welcome. You're a part of the human race. Of course you'd be welcome. And for me, if I saw a white person showing up at a vigil, I wouldn't say you don't belong here. It would make me feel like, wow, get it. You see me. You're
Mhm.
interested. So I just want to encourage people, because it isn't an excuse that you're white.
It isn't. And I've put my foot in it. I've had beautiful DEI educators like yourself push back and say, Leslie, do you understand the meaning behind that statement? And then when I learn, I'm just, okay, I'm enlightened. I'm a little appalled that I said it out in public and didn't know, but you know what's more important? Now I know more.
That's right.
I'm a lifelong feminist. I get called out for internalized misogyny. We can't learn where our gaps are unless we're willing to expose them.
That's right.
And speaking about speaking out, I want to gravitate to your book. You talk about something called sacred motive. Could you explain that to us, please?
Well, the best way I can do it is to give an example. In 2020, I mentioned how many white folks were so angry about George Floyd being murdered. And I've got to take a course. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. And now we've seen, if you look in terms of the research and you look at that bell curve, it's just dropped.
Right.
The motive for responding to George Floyd's murder was not around an issue that would sustain them.
Right.
So a sacred motive then is something much higher than yourself. Not out of guilt, not out of shame, but you heard me say before, this is a moral issue. And it's an issue that continues, so therefore it shouldn't die. So when we are doing this work, there has to be something greater than yourself that motivates you. It's not about money. Yes, companies can make more money if they do the right thing in their jobs and hire the right people and do all of those things. I mean, there's a lot I could say about that, but I don't want that to be your motivation. I don't want that to be your motive. So in my book, I talk about this sacred motive, but I also talk about spending time going internally to examine your sacred motive, to connect with your sacred source, whatever that source is. Even if it's the trees out there, connect with the trees, but go inward and listen to what the calling is for you. Because you and I might dismantle racism again in two very different ways. You might go sit on a board somewhere that requires you to have the voice for the people who are not represented there. Right? That's dismantling racism, to ask the right questions. But you have to get right with what your motive is for why you're doing it.
And from my perspective, the way I view the world, you just wrapped it up in that one sentence when you said, ask questions.
Yes.
It's not needing to know all the right answers. I could live to be 600 and you could too. And we're not going to have all the right answers, but we can have sincerely intended questions.
I love that. And I want to say something too. When you ask a question, you as a white woman, if you're asking me as an African-American a question, and I know that you are trying to ask it with the best of intent, doesn't mean it might not sting or whatever the case may be, but I'm going to try my best to engage in a dialogue of understanding. And I'm not going to say, how could you ask that? Blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to chop your head off. So it's the intention behind the questions too.
Right.
So we must keep asking.
We must. It's essential. Now, I'm just going to, you use some terms I want to understand. You also talk about selfish mindset.
Mhm. It's a provocative word, isn't it?
I like it, but I think I have my own ideas about why I like it. I want to understand why you use it.
Yeah. So in all of my work, I use sacred, selfish, and shared. And the selfish piece is about going inward. All of my work is really about going inward and doing the work that we need to do. So sometimes the selfish piece is about learning to say no and setting boundaries for yourself so that you can go inward to discover what you need. What do you need to do to manifest your greatness? Because if you manifest your greatness, you're going to help other people manifest theirs, which is really what sacred intelligence is about, going inward. So when we talk about a selfish mindset as it relates to racism, it really goes back to that first question that you asked me about feeling overwhelmed and is this possible to do this? It's about rewriting the script and the story that you have told yourself about your ability to dismantle racism and whether racism is possible to eliminate. That's really what it's about. So in the book, I actually give people exercises around what to do to begin to refute those stories. By training, I'm a cognitive behaviorist, trained in that method as a psychologist. So I'm all about what are the behavioral techniques that will get you to change your current behavior to move into a different way of being. And so in the book, that selfish mindset is really about turning inward to the self.
Okay, you talk about exercises, you have 135% of my attention. Not that you didn't, before you only had 134, now you have 135. But what, if you would be so generous, what might be 3 action points that you would be willing to share that can help women enhance their journey to confidence and self-expression in such a way that they are dismantling these primitive and restrictive traditions?
So there's a question that I asked during the height of the protest. And the question was, who do you want to be when this blows over? My daughter hated that question because she says, I don't want it to blow over, Mom. I said, but the people who are listening can understand that. So the one thing I would invite your listeners to do is to say, who do you want to be? Who do you want to be on this side of history? What legacy do you want to leave for the people who are coming behind you, for how you stood up for what was right? So ask that question. The second thing I would do is to say, what's your why? To ask that question. What's my why? And then thirdly, when you've answered what your why is, when you've answered who do you want to be when this blows over, then you say, what do I want to do to share my gifts with the world that will help with dismantling racism? And believe it or not, there are things you can start to do in your community. You can volunteer at some places, whether that be tutoring, whether it be on a board. You could decide if you live in an all-white neighborhood, how do I extend myself out to other neighborhoods and get to know, if let's say you're a parent, how can my kids connect with kids who come from the other part of town, right?
Oh, that is so important for parents, because if we start with the kids, we can start raising a generation that is not so fully indoctrinated with this vile.
Exactly. And so The other thing that I would say, I know I kind of gave you 3 questions as my answer, but the other thing that I would really challenge people to do is to also ask this question: what do I need to know that I don't already know that will help me dismantle racism? And that's a huge question. And that means that we have to, not only do we have to try to build relationships with people who look differently from us, but we also need to take a course. We need to get someone to work with us, to coach with us around this. And if you think that you're a leader out here in the world, whether it be in corporate or solopreneur or entrepreneur, and you don't need to know about race, you're sadly mistaken, because there are a whole bunch of people you're leaving out when your programs and your work doesn't include them. We're only a little in. We may not give our full. And then some people, I want to be very clear about this, because I've done it. I've worked with coaches and I didn't necessarily know starting out what their thinking was around race, but someone introduced me to them. And so that helps me. But I will tell you, when I'm looking at people's sites, and these days it's more than about looking to see if they have a person of color on it, because people got smart after 2020 and they would plop a person of color on their website. But I dig deep to see how you're answering certain questions that speak to me. So there are those things that folks can do, ask the questions.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
What do you mean by my shared movement?
So I began by saying how much I valued my community that I grew up in and that I stand on their backs. The shared movement is taking our gifts out into the world and understanding that if we are going to engage in the work of dismantling racism, we are not alone. And that's the shared piece. The movement is dismantling racism. The shared piece is to know that I have people like Leslie Michaels who's concerned about dismantling racism. And that feeds my soul so much. I think that one of the things that happens is that people are fearful that once I do this, I'm going to be out there on my own. And we are never alone. Never alone. The people who came before us are a great cloud of witnesses.
Yes.
The people who are walking beside us. And yes, there are sacrifices we make when we do this work. But if you open yourself up to it, the aids will come to be support for you. So that's the shared movement.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I have one more question, but before I go there, I just want to remind all of you, I'm going to do for you what I always do, because I love this part. Everything that Dr. Curry will let me post about her in terms of website, contact information, book links, whatever she wants to share, it will be in the program notes. Now, when you go to those program notes, of course, I want you to subscribe. Always, I want you to subscribe. I would love for you to like. And here comes my regular invitation. I'm not going to ever let you all off the hook on this one. What one woman do you know? What one woman? I'm not asking you to share it with the world. What one woman do you know who would gain some wisdom, gain some insight, gain some courage, maybe? Discover a little thread of her own internal audacity by having the opportunity to experience Dr. Curry. Be a good sister and share this episode with her. Send it over to her. You don't have to track her down to find out if she watched it. That's up to her. But this continual ask on my part to share and be a good sister. It's not about whether or not that person watches it. It's about us building an internal habit of being there for each other just a little bit more than what was comfortable last month or last week. Okay? I have faith in you. Think of that one moment and you're going to share. And then last and most important of all, comment. It's wonderful. I am filled up when I get to have these conversations. And I am so honored to be able to put the work of these amazing women out there in a new way. But let's not let it be just a video. Let's start a conversation. Make a comment. If you send a comment for Dr. Curry, I promise you she will receive it. If you send a comment for me, I will read it. And I never even put the parameter on you of saying that it has to be all positive. I want to hear what was truly inspired, what was truly motivated within you as you listened and shared in our conversation. So you subscribe, then you like, then you share, then you comment. It's only going to take 2 or 3 of your minutes. You're going to build some new level of strength inside of yourself from doing it. But now, Dr. Curry, how do we heal our separation in the world from the inside out?
Is that we stop pointing the finger at what everybody else needs to do, and we do our own internal work. And as we do that, those 3 points that we've been talking about is examining what's our sacred motive, engaging in the work of a selfish mindset to say, what do I need to change in order to believe that this is possible? And then connect with other people who are doing the work that we desire to do. And it just starts with saying, I am committed to doing this. As a matter of fact, since this is the beginning of the year, maybe this should be a goal for some of our listeners to say, I am committed to racial equity. And I'm going to do one thing that's going to strengthen my work in this area. So it's not just one project, but just making up our mind, like whatever this thing is I'm going to commit to, I'm going to do it.
I love that. I love that. Now, listeners, you know, I've been talking to you since January 1st, asking you over and over again, who are you going to be at the end of 2023? Within the roadmap you are creating for yourself, you could add, what is your anti-racist activity that you're going to just at least put one foot in, up to your ankle? If that's all you can do this year, put one foot in the pond. Dr. Curry, this has been incredible. Thank you so much. I feel such a deeply felt appreciation for you, and not just your work, but the way you live and present your work. And I'm truly grateful for you being a guest.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, women, I know you have some golden nuggets. I know you do. Pull them out and look at them again tomorrow. and then again next week. See what they ask of you. And as you go through the rest of this day, I invite you to remember you are stronger and wiser